Hey everybody in ISS 652, Dr. Pravott's class. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dr. John Curry. I'm a faculty member in the College of Education here at Morehead State. Been here about a year. I am a faculty member in the Educational Technology Department. And Dr. Pravott's one of my good friends. He and I talk about a lot of things. A lot of times we like to talk to each other because we're both funny and obviously very handsome. But in addition to that, we like to talk about the world at large, the world in general, and just how things are. It's interesting to me to have conversations with Dr. Privott because on a lot of things, like politically and things of that nature, he and I are at opposite ends of the spectrum. But we appreciate the opportunity to talk to somebody who is able to recognize another person's opinion and just have a good conversation about things. One of the things that Dr. Privott and I talk about quite a bit, just because it's a factor in the world, is race. And as he first began preparing for this class, since my particular area of expertise is instructional design, we talked a lot about how to design the class and what are some things that could happen, and just sounding off back and forth as friends. But as we talked, and as some other things have happened over the course of the semester, he asked me if I would be able to come in and speak to your class and just kind of share my perspective. Well, unfortunately, the time that you meet doesn't work out with me and my family schedule. So I offered to shoot this video so that we would be able to still share, and my understanding is he'll post this up and you'll have a discussion board where you'll be able to ask me some questions and I can clarify and things of that nature. So, let me give you a little bit of a background on me and just how I am. And first of all, I hope you're not expecting something very formal. I can go. I'm a technology guy. I've got a video studio in there. I could go shoot this in front of a green screen and be all fancy schmancy, but I'd rather this be a conversation. So, if I start scratching my nose or something, don't take offense to it that I didn't go edit it. I just, this is me pretty much. Privott can tell you that this is me, and we're going to keep it real. I am 44 years old. I was born in 1969 in Nashville, Tennessee. Why do I tell you that? Because when it comes to my understanding of race, that's very relevant. I lived in Nashville from the time I was born until I was 10 or 11, and I moved to Oklahoma. But that time is significant because I lived in Nashville at a time during desegregation and at a time when busing was happening, at a time when race was a pretty volatile issue in a lot of senses. I'm going to share some stories about my family and stuff like that in generic ways, but number one, I think the most important thing when it comes to talking about race is that I think society's attitude on race many times may be misguided to degrees, but the biggest thing that have come to understand is that individuals generally aren't nearly as influenced by race on things as society is. You get a bunch of people together, they tend to go knucklehead. But if you get one person, it tends to be a different story. Some things that happened in my life, I look back at some of my family and some of the things even, that I myself have done, and I think I just didn't know any better. But I grew up in a time of desegregation in Nashville, and I can remember sisters, the way they did it, if I remember the story correctly from my mom. And just be honest right now, if the story came from my mom, it could mean anything. It might be true and it might not be, so, God rest her soul, but we're still trying to figure out if half the story she told us were true. But My understanding of it is that at that time in Nashville, they bussed by grades, so that this grade from the white school would be bussed over, and they'd kind of mix them that way. Two of my sisters' grades were chosen to be bussed. Now, I came from, I didn't know it at the time because it was just my world, but I came from what was probably considered an upper middle class, affluent white family in Nashville. I lived in a part of town called Brentwood. At the time, was surrounded by country music stars and stuff like that. Dolly Parton lived back over there from us. We had property across the street from Marty Robbins. I'd go to school and pass Tom T. Hall's house. Ernest Tubb. Anyway. So, that was everywhere. And my dad was an attorney in Nashville who had started off doing public defender work and then opened his own practice, and it expanded from there. And my dad and his notions were very much a product of the times, and I'm glad to say that he is, with the times. A lot of those misguided opinions have changed. Like I said, I don't fault many people for misguided opinions of the times. But I can remember just some things that I remember about desegregation. I can remember getting a comic book in fourth grade. And as comic books used to have like advertisements in the end, you'd send in for sea monkeys or something like that. And I can remember comic book ads, to join the Junior Clan. And that logo looked so cool. I never did it, but I can remember that. I can remember seeing in Nashville the Klan march. And just something sensed that it was not right about that. I think my most prominent memory of race, two most prominent memories of race. Remember, my one sister was, what my parents decided to do is one sister that's grade was chosen to bus. They didn't think it was a good idea for her, so they put her in a private school. So she didn't have to be bused. My other sister, that they did bus her. And I remember going to a school program for the sister who was bused. And I can remember my parents had an old Ford station wagon. Well, it's old now, but they had a Ford station wagon. And we were in the way back where, the seats folded down and stuff. And I can remember sitting up as we were driving towards my sister's school. And I thought we were going to die. We were in a part of town that we never went to. And it scared me to death. I just knew. I can remember the feeling of being in that school and not having any earthly idea if we were going to make it out of there alive. Because how could we? How could we make it out of this part of town alive? It was nerve-wracking. I remember one time being somehow separated from my parents in a Pizza Hut line, waiting to be seated. And sometimes people will walk off and you turn around and you're talking to somebody and you're talking to a stranger. I was a little kid and I turn around. I'm thinking I'm talking to my parents, and I turn around and bump into this man and look up, and it's just this. I was little, I don't know, 5 or 6. This gigantic black man, and I was just freaked out, scared to death. So, those are my kind of first early memories of race. Moved around a little bit in my high school years, my freshman year. I remember going to school for 5 months in South Carolina to a predominantly black school. When I say predominantly black school, it was probably 80% black, which was certainly not something I was used to. And I can remember particularly one day there was a guy who didn't like me just because I was white. And he would just pick on me incessantly for no other reason than because I was white. I hadn't done anything to this guy. He just didn't like me because I was a white guy. And I can remember, and this guy was bigger than me. He would have worn me out. He would have just destroyed me. He had me backed up in the locker room, and it was go time. He was going to take care of business. And he had me there. He hadn't hit me or anything, but it was very obvious what was about to happen, and I was just trying to figure out how I was going to get out of there. At that point in time, one of the seniors came by, who happened to be black as well. And the senior stopped him and said, "No, you don't touch him because he's one of us." I was on the football team with these two guys. And that was the only thing that saved me. This senior walking by and explaining to him that because I was on the football team, I was off limits because we were teammates. I don't think I was ever so happy to play football as I was at that moment because it saved me. But there's growing up in Oklahoma, it was interesting. There wasn't a whole lot of race issue. I mean, we had some black people in my high school, but I don't remember it ever really being an issue. I do remember for us in Oklahoma, it was a bit of a bigger issue with the Indians. The Indians seem to be looked down on a lot more now, but the only ones that I ever knew or hung out were the ones that I played sports with. So it was almost like South Carolina all over again. It didn't faze me because they were on the team. But Dr. Privott and I were talking about my family history. Now, to give you an idea of, again, to give you some more perspective about me, I was raised Mormon. I'm still practicing Mormon. I've been a Mormon bishop, so very active in that faith. And so, family history is important to us. And I was going through some family history of the line that's my father's grandmother. So that would make her my great-grandmother's line. And I've got the printout here of a lot from her line, and there's some things in here that we thought that it would be beneficial for me to share with y'all and kind of let you know how I feel about it. First of all, I've got a grandfather. I guess it's my. If this is my great-grandmother, this is my great-grandmother's grandfather, so that would make him my great-great-great-grandfather. Was a guy by the name of Odingsell Witherspoon Hart, Captain Odingsell Witherspoon Hart, or they called him O.W. Hart, born in the 9th of December in 1803, near Kitman, Georgia. And here's some interesting things that we find out about him as we look through this book. In 1830, the 1830 census lists O.W. Hart's family as 2 males under the 5 years of age, one of 20 and under 30, that's O.W. Hart. Females, one of 20 and under 30, that's his wife, right? But then it also lists slaves. He had a total of 12 slaves. And I'm not going to break them all down, but he had 9 males and 3 females. 1840 census had O.W. Hart. There were 4 males in the house, 2 females, and 87 slaves, of which there were, that's more math than I can do, a lot and a lot more females. 1850 census, 1860 census. By the 1860 census, it says that they have, and I'm paraphrasing from this. He has 500 head of slaves. Head, like cattle. This is from the thing. That's now. First of all, 500 slaves that's a ridiculous amount. I mean, think about that. That's half of the people that work at Morehead State University. There's about 1,000 or so, I think. Half of them. That's how many people were slaves for this great-great-great-grandfather of mine. Dr. Privott and I did some math on this, and at that point in time, that was about $800 a head, which would translate into $1,860. That is $500,000 just in slaves. That's not the plantation and the probable cotton and tobacco. I mean, this guy was well off. But you look at some of the stories that they talk in here about him, and it's amazing that some of the things that, as they go through his history, and they'll just refer casually to, they went recently to Mr. O. Hart's in Bryan and took several of his Negroes away whilst he was at home. And they just so casually um, mention. They talk about teaching the Bible to slaves, and it's amazing to me, uh, this attitude of the slaves not as people, but rather as property. But you can go back even further, and I'm not going to try to figure out how many grades this is. But this relative of mine died in 1818. Captain John Hill died in 1818, so he was related as well. What I have here is his last will and testament, a copy of his last will and testament, which he died but sometime between August 1817 and January 1818. I'm going to read you just parts of this will. Will of John Hill, Georgia, Greene County, in the name of God, amen. I, John Hill, of the county and state aforesaid, being far advanced in the decline of this time, but of sound mind and memory, do hereby constitute this my last will and testament, and hereby making null and void all other wills made by me. Item first, it is my will that my body may be decently buried, and all my just debts faithfully discharged by my executors hereafter named. Item second, I give to my daughter Elizabeth Hill, a Negro girl named Melinda, with her future increase. So plus whatever kids she has, those are Melinda's as well. Item third, I give my daughter Mary Ann Hill, a Negro girl named Siler, and her future increase. Item fourth, I give my daughter Ann Hill, a Negro girl named Betty, with her future increase. Item fifth, I give to my daughter Martha Hill 3 Negroes, Jim, Frank, and his child Mary, together with their future increase. Item sixth, I give to my daughter Sally Hill, formerly but now Sally Riley, a Negro girl named Rish, and her future increase. Item seventh, and listen to this one. I give to my daughter Martha Hill, another Negro woman by the name of Jenny, to be disposed of as she thinks proper. To be disposed of as she thinks proper. That's amazing to me. I'm going to kind of skip over some of these. Item 12th, I give to my son Robert Hill, a Negro boy named Peyton. Item 13th, it is my will that my granddaughter, Sena Askew, daughter of John Askew and Lily Askew, deceased, have a Negro girl of 10 or 12 years old out of my estate as soon as the money can be collected and a purchase made on a fair price, provided the aforesaid Sena Askew should relinquish all her claim to her mother's claim on my estate. So in other words, take some money and go buy my granddaughter a slave, but get a good price on her. You know, I look at this and I read these things, and Dr. Privott says, how do you process that, Curry? And do I think my ancestors were bad people? Man, I hope not. I really hope not. I don't have any way of knowing. But I know this. I don't fault them. Mainly because that was the issue of the day. That was the way that you made money if you were a white person. It's not my ancestors' fault that they were white any more than it's a black person's fault that they were black or Asian or whatever. You are what you are. I don't fault them. I hope that should they come into today's world, that they would see things very differently. Dr. Privott and I have, as we've talked about this, I think that the majority of the people who were slaveholders, had they grown up in today's world, would have the same social views that we have on it, that it's, not an appropriate thing, that obviously that people of color, whatever that color may be, are just that. They are people and not animals. Now, that being said, I don't want you to go fool yourself and think that there's not, that those feelings of less than are not prevalent in today's world. these are not sentiments that are only in 1860 or 1813 or whichever of the two. Pick either one of those two ancestors. As I mentioned before, I'm Mormon. I served my mission in Guatemala. The guys in the white shirts and the ties and the little name tag. I did mine in Guatemala. And the significance of that is the fact that I spent the majority of my time not with the Hispanic Guatemalans, but rather with the Mayan Guatemalans. And the Mayans, the direct descendants of the Maya, are very much have, in a lot of ways, they're looked at the same ways that the blacks of the 50s and 60s are. Even as early as the 1970s, there was a president in Guatemala who did not like literate Indians. And they tell the stories of the death squads who would go find literate Indians and kill them for no other reason than they were literate and they didn't think that they should be taught. And that was in the 70s. I was there between 1988 and 1990. The interesting thing about this is that the death squads wore white shirts and ties. What do the Mormon missionaries wear? White shirts and ties, right? So a lot of times if we went in somewhere where there hadn't been people, outside people in a long time, that brought up memories. They talk, the last area that I lived in, the last town that I lived in and worked in was a place called Ponsos, which is famous for the Ponsos Massacre. 3,000 Indians dead in the street by the government for simply being literate and protesting the death squads. The main town, the main road that runs through Ponsos is maybe 3 miles long, 2-3 miles long. I can't imagine 3,000 bodies littering that. It's unfathomable. But even today, the Guatemalans or the Mayans in Guatemala are very much second-class citizens, and very oppressed. And that's just the places that I've been. Interestingly enough, there was one place where we were where there hadn't been missionaries in this one little village for a while, and so the mission assigned 2 missionaries to go work in this village, and the missionaries went in there, and again, white shirts and ties, and the missionaries went in there, and the first night they came back from work, and we walked everywhere. We were in the middle of the jungle. They came back, and it was after dark, and they were met by basically the neighborhood watch, and they were like, y'all can't be coming in after dark. And they're like, well, we got to work, we got to do what we got to do, And they're like, well, you shouldn't come in after dark. Next night they came in after dark again. And they were met again, and they said, you can't come in after dark. Again, because white shirts, ties, this freaks them out because of the death squads, right? This is a cultural thing now. Think about what we would consider, immigration to Hispanics or just in any urban area, the police showing up, whether they're there for right or for wrong, there's already an image. Third night, again, they come in late and they said, okay, this is your last warning. You don't come in late and you're here. And they said, we can't do that. Well, the fourth night, these guys came in and they came in late and they were met by the people again. Only they were armed this time. And here these 2 elders, and maybe y'all have seen these guys walking around your town, not these 2 particular ones, but guys like them, 19 to 21-year-old boys, were held at shotgun point and tied up. 2 Americans, and whipped. And I'm talking a bullwhip, whipped, for no other reason than they weren't trusted because of their race and the way they dressed. And this is 1988, 89. 2 Americans. A friend of mine was the first American back in that area. They had put when they initially they pulled the missionaries out. And when they put some back in, they were just Guatemalans. Not just, but they were Guatemalan missionaries. And then a friend of mine was the first white guy back in, and he said it was pretty tense to be back there knowing that that had happened. But beyond that, I spent some time. While I've got my prop here. How do you like this? Look at that. Juvenile corrections officer in the Texas Youth Commission, right? I remember I worked at the Gainesville State School, which is a school for serious offenders. And we had some guys in there who'd done some bad things. And I worked on the honors dorm, so I had the most well-behaved of the inmates, but I still had guys who did unfathomable things. And I'll tell you, as a white guy going in there, that was a scary job. Just because I was white. And they made no bones about not liking me because I was white. And as a matter of fact, even amongst the other staff there would be people who would say, "Curry, you are the whitest guy I know." Or I had this one lady who I loved dearly, still love her. I mean, she's just so sweet that I worked with. We trained together, who was an African-American lady. And she said, "Oh, my friends will not believe that I have got a white friend who is a Mormon. Of all things for me to have a friend, a white Mormon." And, and and it's just, to me, I'm used to being the majority, not the Mormon part, but the white part. And to be in these worlds where I'm anything but, and even, that was 2005, where they couldn't believe that a white man, I guess overall, when it comes to race, here's what I know, right? Number one, I'm glad that we're smart now, or smarter. I'm glad that I can have a friend, Dr. Privott, who can be just that, who can grow up where he grew up and defy all odds and become an educated man, but also, because he and I have talked about this, I say an educated man because when I looked at Dr. Privott, I don't see a black man. But as he reminds me all the time, I can't take that qualifier out because that is who he is as well. I see a man who came from inner city, who is now an educated man, an educated black man, who is breaking stereotypes and barriers all over the places. I'm proud to call him a friend. I'm glad that he and I can have conversations. I can't say that I've been through my life and I didn't have presupposed notions about other races. I think when I was in high school, I was a kid who grew up in the South in the 70s and the 80s. But my formative, opinion years were in the 70s. I had a definite opinion about races. I certainly never bought into the notion of, separate or anything like that. But, you look at, you ask yourself the question, what if my daughter came home with a person of color, or my son came home with a person of color? There was a time in my life that would have mortified me. Would it now? Nope. I'll look you right in the eyes and say no. Would I be concerned? Yeah, only because I know society doesn't buy it yet. But see, here's the dumb thing about society, in my opinion. Tell me why. You tell me why my son could come home with a Hispanic or an Asian girl and it's not a big deal. But if my son came home with an African American girl, it is. That's not right. You tell me why my daughter could come home with an Asian guy or Hispanic guy or an African American guy, and they're all three seen differently, right? The Asian guy is going to be a good provider and all that stuff. The the Hispanic guy might be sketchy because who knows if he's legal, and then let's not even go there with the African American guy, right? You know, see, society's not consistent on these things. So what does it mean for us? Well, that means we got to be smart. You know, we're the ones who change it. We're the ones who change it. We don't have to perpetuate those stereotypes. We don't. We have to recognize that they exist. We have to recognize that they exist, because if we don't recognize they exist, then we can't change them, right? You know, again, I'm a white guy, but you know, I've experienced more bias towards me, not because of my race, but because of my religion. Every one of you watching this, when I said I'm a Mormon, had something come up in your mind that you've heard about Mormons. That's what I deal with. That's what I deal with. That perception. True or not, whatever it was you thought of, that's your perception. But that's me. And I live with that, and I own that, because you can't take that away from me. You know, that's no different than race. So, you know, what do we have to do? How can we change this stuff? Well, thank heavens, I know y'all are talking about law. Thank heavens the law would never allow something like these wills today, because it doesn't work that way, right? We recognize people are people. Thank heavens we're being smarter in a lot of ways about race. But what we have to do is we have to get to the point that we let people own who they are and where they're from, and just expect people to be the best that they can. What we got to do is, you know, we hear people talk a lot about how things are. You know, I've never lived in an urban area other than when I lived in Guatemala City, right? But, you know, there's a definite perception of an urban area in the United States, whether it be New York City, you know, you go to Detroit, Cincinnati, you know, you've got people who are stuck in a cycle of poverty. It's way too easy for one side to say they just need to go get a job. I get that. I see the notion there. But beyond that, the question is, okay, you tell me how they're going to go get a job. Don't just tell me to get a job. Make sure I'm trained. Make sure that I can go do that. You know, everybody on both sides of the political aisle is full of ideas, right? One side preaches one thing. I'm not even going to try it because I don't want to have my politics enter into this. But what I'm saying is we have to be smart. Society's got to be smart, and we got to learn to take care of each other regardless. But at the same time, we have to want to take care of ourselves, be willing to take care of ourselves. But it's a whole group dynamic that has to change. So how do we do that? I don't know. We're not there yet. I'm just thankful that in my 44 years, we've gone from me being scared to death to go where my sister went to school, to the fact that I sit down and have a conversation with Dr. Privott, or he and I go work out or whatever together, and you know, I don't ever consider his race. You know, it's not an issue for me. Now it is for him, because again, he looks around and he doesn't see people who look like him. I've been to places with him where I looked around and I said to him, "There's nobody here who looks like me," and he just laughs and he says, "Now you welcome to my world." You can see him saying that. Welcome to my world, right? Dr. Privott has a character. At any rate, I guess overall, you know, I believe that we're all children of God and should be treated with respect as such. We're here to, as Dr. Privott puts it, to help the cause. We have to be smarter, and we have to educate a smarter generation. You know, I have to educate my children to be better about it than I am, so that hopefully when their children or their grandchildren look back at these wills and stuff, they think it's even crazier than we do. That they look at that and go, what? So they can look back at maybe one day this video and hear me describing things that happened in my life and think, that happened in my grandpa's life? That's crazy. You know what? Yeah, it is crazy. But it's still a fact. It's still a fact. You know, above all, this is one guy's experience and one guy's opinion. I'm glad that my parents taught me to be smart and to think and gave me the tools that I needed to be able to step back and look critically at the world around me and recognize I see opinions in society here and I don't buy them. I don't buy them. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this stuff with y'all. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Dr. Privott knows how to get a hold of me. I'm more than willing to share more stories and stuff. I'm trying to keep this short, and look at this. It's already 35, almost 36 minutes. But, you know, it just comes down to the same thing. Just be smart. Just be smart. It doesn't have to stay this way, and we're the ones that change it. And if we don't change it, who will? Right? So let's do it. Let's do it right. We know what's right. Let's just act that way. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time, and I wish you all the success in the world. Bye.